It's time for our unit on retouching. So let's first off look at the facts of what is retouching. So most of what people do to photos, like, if you put a filter on something in Instagram or you do just some lightening here and there, we would refer to that as just basic editing. Most photographers, when they take a picture, are going to make the levels look better or maybe just add their custom filter that they use all the time. We would consider that editing. But retouching tools actually go and modify those pictures, like when you have your school picture taken and they remove the braces from your teeth, or they remove acne from your face or your shoulder or something like that. That's what we would consider more retouching. And what you're going to notice is, as I go through some of these retouching tools, is that many of them are destructive because by their nature, they're manipulating the pixels. So this is not your standard non-destructive ways of doing things. Now, there are a couple of these, particularly in Photoshop, that you could still do non-destructively on a separate layer. And I will show you a couple of those. But in PhotoP, other than the two I mentioned, none of them can be done non-destructively. So I'm going to really only focus on those two as far as the non-destructive way to do it. Otherwise, most of this is going to be pixel-based, which means you cannot do destructive methods on smart objects. So if you have a layer that is a smart object, there's a good chance you're going to have to rasterize that layer in order to be able to use some of these tools. So let's keep that in mind. So what other things would we use retouching for? Removing blemishes, moles, body marks, freckles, whitening teeth, which, as we've talked before, we could do with a levels adjustment, but we're going to show you how you could do it here. Smoothing skin. We have a blur filter that would allow us to blur that. Now, as you also know, we have a blur tool that allows it. We have a blur filter, so technically we could do that one non-destructively using a blur filter. Or we could remove a distracting item, and that's going to require putting some pixels over the top of that item to hide it. So that's, again, going to be a destructive method. So anyway, I'm going to break down the tools just at their basics and demonstrate them. You shall have opened up this Unit 7 document that has 4 pictures kind of piled on top of each other just so you didn't have to open and place them. You will notice if you look at the pictures, all of them are rasterized layers except for this top one, which is a smart object. And I only wanted to show you that one because I wanted to demonstrate how these are indeed going to be considered destructive. If we come over here, let me show you where these tools are. Now, of course, it depends on what tool you used last as to what you're going to see over here. But over here, where you see the Band-Aid icon, that Band-Aid icon represents some of what Photoshop calls healing tools. And the Band-Aid with the little dot behind it is called the Spot Healing tool, and they're actually considered brushes. So there's the Spot Healing brush tool, and then the Band-Aid without the dot is the Healing brush tool. Then there's a funny little tool called the Patch tool. We won't mess with Content Aware Move, but then below that is the Red Eye tool, which we'll get to at the end of this lesson. And then if you scoot down a couple buttons, then we have what's called the Clone Stamp tool. And the Clone Stamp tool is really nothing more than a copy and paste tool. It's just a fast way to copy one part of the picture and paste it somewhere else. It does not modify the pixels, and therefore that one can be done non-destructively if you do it a certain way. And then the main retouch tools are going to be down here a little bit lower. Yours probably will be represented by this little icon here, the little raindrop. That's the blur tool. The triangle's the sharpen tool. And then there's a little finger, a little hand. That's the smudge tool. Think of that like a finger painting tool. And then right below those tools is another set of tools. Probably what everybody refers to in my class as the lollipop is what you see first. That's the dodge tool. Then below it is the burn tool. The burn tool is supposed to be like a hand holding a match, I think. And then below that is the sponge tool. And I'll explain what all of those do here as we work through this activity. All right, so let's hop to it. We will talk about each one of these in detail. I'm going to start off with the Spot Healing brush. So the Spot Healing brush is, again, represented by a Band-Aid with a little dot. If you are in PhotoP, in your note sheet, you'll see a Band-Aid with kind of like a star next to it. Either way, that's your spot healing brush. Now notice if I point to Alexis's face here, I'm getting a no sign, and that's because this is one of those destructive tools, and her layer is a smart object layer. Therefore, it's telling you right away, can't use this picture. So if you click on here, it's probably going to yell at you and say this smart object has to be rasterized, and you're going to say, yes, we do need to rasterize it, or you could have done that on your own. So I'm going to hit OK. We no longer have a smart object icon here. All right, let's go ahead and zoom up so you can see better what's going on this picture. You can use your navigator, or you can press Control plus and then use your hand tool by holding space bar to scoot over. So some simple areas to fix on here would be she's got a bump on her shoulder and on her hand. The spot healing brush works like this. You basically click on it, and then up at the top where you would choose a brush, that's what you're going to do. Now, I would suggest putting your hardness at about the middle on any of these tools for a starting point. All right, so then you're going to make your brush just bigger than the spot. Not a lot bigger, just bigger, okay? All right, and then you just click. Bam, done. And that one's gone. I'm going to hold down my space bar and go up to her shoulder, point to this little dot. Bam, it's done. Don't you wish we had one of those in real life? Not that we want to, but you know, I could come over here to this door and get rid of, well, let's say I'll get rid of these two little nail holes that were left over. So you make it just big enough. Bam, bam. And sometimes you have to do it more than once for it to take as well. So you can see I'm not going to go get rid of all of those, but you're more than welcome to do whatever you'd like to the image. So that's the spot healing brush. It's generally used for just something that you can contain within your cursor. And when you draw your circle, you need the boundaries around the circle. Think in terms of it's like they're going to collapse down. It's like it's going to look at the edges of the circle and it's just going to clamp down. And then whatever was around the edges is what it clamps down and just sucks in and covers that with. So let's look down here at the bottom of this image. For instance, there's just this funny place on the wood here. I can't really put my mouse around this section and do that properly. Because if I do, there's some weird variations in the texture there. That's not as good of a candidate for the spot healing brush. We're going to use a different tool for that one. So, but if around the edges of it, it's pretty much consistent, this is the one you can do. So like if you have a white wall and there's an outlet on the wall and you need to get rid of that because you took a picture and you didn't realize there was an outlet there, well, if the wall's pretty much solid, just make a big enough circle and zap that thing. Or like there's a little bird in the sky, but the sky's otherwise just mostly blue, you can just zap that little bird and bam, the bird is gone. That's the spot healing brush. Now, technically, you can do in Photoshop the spot healing brush on its own layer if you check mark this button, sample all layers, but you cannot do that in PhotoP. So we're just going to kind of ignore it for our purposes here today. Okay, the next button down is the healing brush. Now, the healing brush is kind of like the spot healing brush mixed with the clone stamp brush, okay? So let me switch over quickly to the wedding picture. And look down here at the bottom. We have 3 outlets on the floor. By the way, this is my wedding, and I'm a little unnerved by the fact that looking back on these pictures, my photographer didn't retouch these photos enough to just remove the outlets. Granted, I got married 25 years ago, so, you know, it is what it is. It is what it is. Okay, so looking at these, first off, they're kind of close to the edge of the screen, so I can't really make my brush exactly the right size, but what I could do would be to take my spot healing brush and wiggle over this. So I could kind of wiggle back and forth. Now, this one's probably going to be the easiest one because it's blended into the carpet the most. So I'm going to take my spot healing brush and try to fix this one using the zigzag method, as I call it. And that one did pretty good. And I might could get away with doing that with these other ones, but I want to show you how you can use the clone stamp tool, okay? So now the clone stamp can be done on its own layer. So we are going to make a new layer, and we're going to call it Bye Bye Plug. Okay? So make that layer and click on it. Let me pop into PhotoP just so you can see how this looks in here. I'll zoom up onto this space. Going to make a new layer. You can't see my icon down there, but it's there. Bye Bye Plug. And then I'll come over here and click on my clone stamp. So the brush is going to look a little bit differently up here in PhotoP. I'm going to go back and forth. There is a button up here at the top. In PhotoP, they call it the Select Source button. But basically, when you hold down the Alt key, you select the pixels. They call it the sample. You select where to sample the color from that you're going to use in a minute to paint over these outlets, okay? So we're going to hold the Alt key in a minute, and we're going to set that sample area, okay? And then here where it says Source, we're setting the source, and then it says, where are we going to look? Are we going to look on the current layer? Well, guess what's on the current layer, folks? A big fat nothing, right? So not the current layer. We're going to look at all the layers. Or you could say current and below, since there is a picture in front of that, so we don't want to mess with it. We'll say current and below. So it's looking at my current layer and then anything underneath it, which everything's turned off, so it's just going to look at that layer there. Okay, now we've got to do a couple of things, and it's very important to know that your brush hardness plays a big deal in the way the clone stamp works. Let me just do an example, okay? I'm going to delete this, so you don't necessarily have to do it unless you just want to. I'll pop back over to Photoshop. So let me click on my clone stamp. Up here, sample, and I'm going to say current and below, or you could say all as long as you turn off all the other layers. Okay, so I'm on my Bye Bye Plug layer. I'm going to make my brush really big just to prove this point to you, okay? Now I'm going to set my hardness at 100. I'm going to click my mouse in a minute while I'm holding the Alt key, okay? So I'm holding the Alt key. My mouse in Photoshop will change to a target icon, and I'm going to click one time. Okay, now see this button up here? That's talking about using pressure and all of that. We're going to ignore that. So even though it looks like a target, not the same thing. All right, now look at my mouse. My mouse is loaded up with wedding dress, right? But if I come over here, I'm just going to click right here one time. It puts down, it's like a copy paste, okay, because I used a hard brush. Now, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go up here and make it completely soft. Now look, if I click one time, that's what it puts down. So the clone stamp doesn't actually do any blending, but you can make the edges look like they're blending as long as you use a soft brush. So technically I could kind of probably work over here a little bit, make it kind of look like there's some, you know, additional girth to this wedding dress, like so. That's not really there. But the problem is, because the edges are soft on this edge over here, it kind of looks blurry, like the edges should be sharp, right? So I would probably then have to turn around and take like an eraser, like a plain old eraser, and I'd want to make it a hard eraser, and then I'd have to zoom up in here like really close and try to kind of fix this to make it look more like it was real, based on what the other layers look like. Say, I don't know that that's all that great, but we'll just pretend it's great. All right, I'll get rid of that little piece that's see-through over there. All right, and then of course if we zoom out, you know, now I've got a little more to the train of the wedding gown, and you can't really tell that that wasn't there. You wouldn't know if you didn't know, okay? So that's how you can use the clone stamp. So the clone stamp and the healing brush work just like each other. They both use the Alt key to define the sample point. It's the place that we're basically clicking, that's like dipping the mouse, dipping the paintbrush into that spot, loading it up in the cursor to paint with. Now you have to be careful, and in Photoshop you can really see this, but you have to be really careful to watch where it's painting from. So like I'm going to come over here and hold down Alt. Actually this time let's go with a little bit of a harder brush. I'm going to hold down Alt on this edge. Oh, actually, I don't really want the edge because I want it to be here. I'll just duplicate this corner. All right, I'm going to hit down Alt and take this part. Okay, so now this is in there, right? So see now, if I put that down because of that edge, that's awful, right? Now, if I make my brush smaller, though, it doesn't make the picture any smaller, right? It doesn't make where I sampled any smaller. It stays the same size. It's just a different size brush. So now I can come in here and click and put it down. And maybe add another little piece down here and put it down. Okay, and since it's a clone, see how they basically are clones? Like, because you and I know, we know, it kind of looks exactly the same over there. So like before I put down this next piece, I might want to go try to find a better place to steal some pixels from. You know, maybe come click Alt over here and see if we can, you know, steal some pixels there. Now we can also turn our brush around. We can bring up our brushes, brush settings here, as we've done in the past, and I can rotate my brush around. Oh, no, I can't rotate my brush around. It's not going to let us do it. So we are stuck with what we have here. Now, if it's on its own layer, actually, let's put that in there. There we go. If it's on its own layer, then we could rotate that part of the layer, but it's not. If I were to rotate the whole thing right now, here's what we have. We have all that stuff there, see? So I can't just press Control-T and rotate it because I'd rotate all of the stuff that we set down. See that? Because it's all on one layer. But if I did need one little bitty piece, I could put that part on its own layer and then deal with it that way. Okay, again, remember, this is destructive, so if I wanted to get rid of something, I'm going to have to use an eraser key to try to fix that. Okay, well, good enough. And again, maybe you would notice, maybe you wouldn't if you didn't know the difference in the first place. Okay, let's go ahead and look at one of these outlets, and we'll try using the other tool. I'll go over to PhotoP this time, just so you can see it with a different tool. So we're going to use the actual healing brush this time instead of the clone stamp. The healing brush is going to keep some of the lights and darks from stuff, okay? So whereas the clone stamp's like copy paste, healing brush not. Okay, so healing brush, my source. Okay, remember if I do current layer, my current layer is empty. So my source is going to need to be current and below or all and turn off all the other layers. And then I need to decide about hardness, although it doesn't matter as much with this one because this one has a blending feature built in. Okay. All right, so I'm going to come in here. And by the way, I've actually heard that the retouch tools are better in PhotoP than Photoshop. I don't know if that's true. That's what people say. Okay. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and I'm going to come over here and click. And see the plus sign? All right, I'm going to give it a click. So I sampled from there. And now I can come over here. Now, do you see that little plus sign over there moving? You see that in Photoshop too. That shows you where it's painting pixels from. So as I'm moving over, I think I ran out of screen over there. All right, now I'm going to let go. And then it tries to blend it for me. Oh yeah, there's another outlet over there. So let me go. I'll just hit Alt and come up here somewhere. And then I'll just kind of paint over this area a little bit and let go. And see how it lightened a little bit there at the end? Even though I took it from a different part of the room, it still kept some of that like carpet from around the edges and it blended that lightness and darkness. So the healing brush has a blending element like the spot healing brush does when we take it and it kind of blends it automatically. That's what the healing brush is going to do. But a lot of people just use the clone stamp with a really fuzzy edge. And a lot of times you can get by with that, because the fuzzy edge will make it blend with whatever it's around it. So you can kind of go either way. It doesn't really matter to me. I'll do the same thing here with the clone stamp, but I'm going to turn it way down on hardness. Make sure I'm current and below. Let me use a little bit bigger brush. Okay, so I'm going to hit Alt over here and then come over here and start painting. And again, you're going to see that plus sign. And then let go. Notice no lightness or darkness changed on that one because that was the clone stamp. So it's literally like copying and pasting wherever that little plus sign's traveling. It's just copying and pasting those pixels in there. Okay? And then, of course, you can continue on using whichever one. I'll go back to the healing brush and try this again with the healing brush. Just kind of wiggle over this thing, and bam, it's gone. Now, if you can kind of see, like I feel like I can see a little bit that that's darker here, then just go over that area again. Oh, it's actually, my healing brush is actually trying to keep the darkness over here and I can't quite fix it. So let me go to my clone stamp, and occasionally that's what you have to do. You use one tool and then come behind it with another one. All right. There we go. Just be careful because you don't want like patterns to emerge where you've like clone stamped from the same, you know, if I'm doing grass, you don't want to see like this same funny little weed over and over and over again in the exact same spot. Like every 4 feet, well, there's that weed again because you took something out of there and you didn't think about it ahead of time. All right. So that gives you an introduction to those 3 tools of the 4. We're going to talk about the next one, the patch tool, real quick before we break. So the patch tool I probably could have used as well. I'm going to use it on this other picture, the 4th of July picture. So let's click on there. The patch tool is entirely destructive. So you cannot do it on its own layer. And again, as my grandma would say, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Basically means it doesn't matter how you do it, you're going to get the same results. So some of these tools, you may be like, well, I could have just done that with the spot healing brush. Yeah, you could have. Or you could have tried the patch tool. It just really depends. You just can try one and see how it works. Okay, so the patch tool works like this. The patch tool is kind of like taking a lasso and drawing around something and then pointing at it. So here I go. Okay, and it does, it like puts marching ants around it. And then point at it and drag somewhere that has like matching good sidewalk for this example. Okay, and then let go. And did you see how it got dark? So it's like the healing brush, not like the clone stamp. It's kind of like the healing brush, except we're picking a very specific area to do it in. So I come down here, draw my circle, click and drag over here where it's good, let go, Control D, we're good to go. Patch is destructive though. There's no way to do it on another layer. So just bear that in mind anytime you use that tool. But, you know, it's a pretty good tool. And I always kind of think like when I'm using these retouch tools, it's generally speaking because I'm just working on one individual picture. And so I'm not too worried sometimes about whether that's destructive or not. Now up here, I may or may not be able to remove this fire hydrant. Let's see. Okay, now notice whenever I'm getting ready to patch, I need to try to line it up with the sidewalk. And it's, there we go, right there, roughly. And let go. Not too bad. I mean, it's definitely not lined up, but it's not awful. I could try it again and just grab the funny little edge that's not straight and maybe come down here and see if I can line up that edge with another piece. There we go. See, not so bad. And I got rid of that thing. I don't know what this yellow thing is over here, but same situation. Just grab around it, grab to a good area, let go, and it will blend with that underlying. I love the patch tool, by the way. And I know I'm like a big non-destructive. I'm non-destructive except when I'm using that patch tool, buddy, because I like that patch tool. It's just it's my friend. So, the other thing that you can do is you can predefine an area before you do, say, clone or whatever. So, for instance, like over here, if I don't want to mess with that sidewalk right there, then before I use my patch or whatever, not my patch, but my other tools, I might take a lasso. So watch this. I'm just taking a plain lasso. Make sure your feather's at 0. I'm going to take a plain lasso. You could even use a polygon lasso. Actually, that might make more sense here because I want to draw a straight line. So like if I take my polygon lasso, I can go right here and be like, okay, don't mess with any of that stuff because that stuff all looks really good. Okay. And then come down here. The only thing I want to get rid of, I guess I need to get rid of the shadow. I don't know if that's a shadow. I think it's just the road. Is this stuff. Okay. Not a good example because there's a piece hanging off, but it's okay. All right. So now I can take my clone stamp, healing brush, whatever you want to use. I'll try well, I won't want to use the healing brush because it's dark underneath. And so more than likely because it's dark underneath, the healing brush won't work. So I need to go with my patch, my clone stamp tool, I mean. So I'm going to click on my clone stamp. I'm at current and below. Okay, now I'm going to hold down Alt and go find like an area over here that should match about this. So I'm going to click Alt right there. Okay, see it's in there. And now I'm going to come, but it will not go outside of where my marching ants are at. See that? Now Control D. We can see a line there, but I can fix that line with a spot healing brush rather easily. But I didn't mess up the curve over there. And that to me is more important. Okay, now I could probably just use a simple spot healing brush to fix that. There we go. Kind of looking a little weird over there, but anyway. Okay. All right, so that's kind of an introduction to the beginning of the retouch tools. We went over the spot healing brush, the patch tool, and the clone stamp. All used in similar ways. Spot healing, usually just something where the background around it is mostly the same. Okay. Healing brush, which blends a little bit with whatever is underneath it. So if we have a dark area and we still need it to be dark, and we have to take something over here that's maybe lighter, whenever we heal from there, it's going to keep that light and that dark a little bit. Clone stamp is like a copy paste, but if we do it with a soft brush, it'll blend around the edges, but it doesn't do it natively. And then the patch kind of throws all of it together. Take a lasso, the patch lasso, get that selection, point in the middle of that selection, scoot your mouse out to an area that's good that you want to kind of copy from, and then it does all of it. It blends it and everything for you. And then, as I said, you can pre-select an area to protect pixels so you don't smear them or mess them up. All right, let's continue on in the next session.